Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. So today, I hope you're here to learn a bit more about EOR versus entity. If you're in a global seat or global company and you have responsibilities for anything on a global scale, or if your company is in one country and those conversations are starting about how do we expand? Where do we get talent? Where are these people going to come from? You're in the right place. Today, the topic is EOR versus entity, and these are decisions that can make or break your global expansion. Today, I have with us Matt Taylor. Matt, and I'm going to give Matt a great introduction. Matt, I'm going to brag about you for just a minute here. Matt, and you'll see him on your screen, he's a global HR executive with over 20 years of experience building and leading HR functions across the life science industry. Right now, Matt is the VP of HR at Endpoint Clinical. Endpoint Clinical is a PE-backed clinical trial technology company. They have operations in the US, Europe, all across Europe, and Asia Pacific region as well. A little bit more about Matt's background, because I want everybody to understand the variety of experiences he's had, and this is why he's here to help us today and talk through some of those experiences. So I think some of you can relate to those and hopefully gain some knowledge today. Matt has a great M&A background, so lots of activity in that area. He's done organizational restructuring, which of course comes along with that M&A activity. Large-scale workforce transitions. Anytime you've got that kind of activity, you also have to have that transition for these companies and for the employees. At Endpoint, he directed the people side of the acquisition and integration. So onboarding, benefits harmonization, immigration coordination, compensation alignment, big projects that really matter to businesses and their success. He's also been running global workforce reductions across regions when those needed to take place when you have this M&A activity. All of this has been on a global scale, so he really gets it. He understands when you have these kinds of expansions, what needs to take place. His particular depth in HIRS optimization is really interesting. We'll dive into that a bit during the conversation. He's used a lot of different tools, and Matt has a lot of experience with AI. He has definitely put some energy into how companies and HR teams can utilize AI and leverage it within the organizations. He has a really interesting approach to HR centers as well. People, process, product, and profitability, all with an HR connection and building a consistent focus. So, Matt, welcome. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here as well, and hopefully can pass along a little knowledge and answer questions.
Sounds great. Absolutely. Hey, I know I asked everybody to put some chats in there about where you are in the world. We're going to throw up a poll really quick before we get to the questions for Matt. I would love to get a read on the experiences that this audience has had and everybody who's participating in this webinar. Kind of help steer some of the webinar conversation because I want to make sure it's meaningful for you. So you'll see a poll come up here in just a moment. Here it is. What's most likely to push your company to rethink its entity versus EOR approach right now? If you have expanded in countries with an entity, you know that can be daunting, right? And an employer of record can give you the ability to quickly move into a specific region or location and get talent fast. So wondering for everybody here what you're thinking. We'll see the results as the poll is answered, and you click on one of the answers. Nikesh, it's frozen. Well, not frozen, but I can't vote, but because I'm a host. But if you when you start to see those answers come in, would love to see the results. All right, we should get those up soon. And Nikesh, you can let me know when you get those. Love to hear what the audience thinks. There we go. Okay, so some people haven't hit that point yet, which is fine. That's completely fine. And you're here to learn and be prepared when those conversations come up. So it looks like speed of entering a new market. Isn't that always the way too? We'll dive in. That's going to be one of the topics we'll talk about, Matt. A specific hire we can't make under our current structure. Absolutely right. Somebody's come in and said, "Hey, we need to expand," or we have a client who has a need in another country. How do we address that? So thanks for those who participated and gave us some insight. I really appreciate it. All right, Matt, let's dive in. I can't wait to pick your brain. I've reserved some of these questions because I'm so curious myself. When you look back at some of these large expansions that you've had, Matt, what is the moment when you realized your existing structure wasn't going to work, or what you had in place already inside your organization wasn't going to be able to support that? If you could kind of walk me through that time, what was going on in your company, would love to hear the backstory on that.
Yeah, when that happens, there's usually a varying set of circumstances. You might have that one hire, like in the poll. You might
Mm-hmm.
be doing a larger M&A, or my favorite reason is to expand into a market that you're not in yet. So it's rarely a lightning bolt moment, right? It's more like
Mm-hmm.
the ground is shifting under a rapid series of business events that are happening. So each of those kind of scenarios has taught me something that the last one didn't. So we went through a stretch where we were managing workforce actions across all of our geographies simultaneously, different countries, different legal frameworks, different expectations around notice periods, severance constructs, tenure calculations, all happening in overlapping windows.
Mm-hmm.
Ireland's a good example. We walked in assuming tenure would calculate similarly the way it would in the UK, and it doesn't. And that assumption alone could have cost us real money, and more importantly, real trust with an employee if we hadn't caught
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
In the Philippines, we had entirely separate settlement frameworks that we had to build, understanding what was essential from scratch. In China, right? We have an entity, but in China, a unique scenario. If you're not in from China, if you don't operate organically from China, you're only allowed to have one entity. And if you want to operate in other cities and have other
Mm-hmm.
entities, you have to use an EOR. So what crystallizes this for me isn't any kind of single failure or there were no disasters. It's the accumulating sense that we're spending an enormous amount of HR and legal bandwidth reinventing country by country every single time with outside counsel on speed dial in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
And in a business like ours, our sponsors are trusting us to run their clinical trials, flawlessly.
Right.
So um, you have to start to ask: Is this the best? Is this how my people should be spending our time and our energy, right? It's the buy
Right.
build question, a buy build borrow question. Untangling employment law trivia market by market is not a fun exercise for most people. So should we be doing that,
Yeah.
or should that be somebody else's core competency? So our team, our company can be building an actual talent strategy to deliver like that. That I think is what culminates in the real moment. It's not always a single hire. It's not the realization that we'll figure it out each time. That doesn't scale, and it
Mm-hmm.
quietly taxes your best people time and again, their headspace in a way that's just hard to see until you add it all up.
Right. Right. And that's great insight. Absolutely. As you were talking, I was thinking about the conversations that I've experienced internally when it comes time to expand. And, I have the CFO walk in and say, we've landed a client. They're in X country. I'll use Brazil as an example. And Philippines actually came up as well and said, we have to have people on the ground quickly. That was one of the other poll results, right? We have to
Mm-hmm.
have them there. We've committed. The ink is going to be it's going to be dry. They're signing soon. This is an emergency, especially in the clinical research world. If it's a rescue study, there is you have to move really quickly and find talent fast. And Linx was that company for me at that time. They were actually already helping with the search component. You mentioned that talent, right? Finding the talent, already helping with the search component. I was saying I have to have people tomorrow. You're right. The EOR is a much faster, more efficient way to get the results that these executives are looking for, and the company needs, quite frankly, because these in our world, the studies in the clinical research world, pharmaceutical world, there are patients at the end of that need the support, right? And they're counting on this. So it's my experience as well has been great working with an EOR. But that's a debate, though, right? That happens internally. A lot of, and I'm sure the individuals, people who are on this call, probably have experienced that too, right? We're here to try to help you gain some knowledge so you're better prepared during that debate session. What do you need to be asking for? Just to know that you don't have to figure it out yourself, right? There are lots of resources, lots of companies that can help you decide, or lots of, I guess, resources that can help you decide. Linx is a great example. They have a tool that you can go through with one of their salespeople that'll help you decide, do I need to open an entity or not? Sometimes you don't have to move quickly. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had that experience. Have you opened up an entity in a country might have not gone the employer of record route, or did you always start out with an
Yeah.
EOR?
Yes, we have opened up entities in other countries,
Mm-hmm.
but that's a much more concerted effort. You're still going to need external partners, external legal, external expertise
Mm-hmm.
if you don't have it on staff. But it's, for me, it's the speed, quality, the iron triad question, like when and how do you do that? And there's lots of kind of parameters and permutations that will give you different reasons to do it. But we have opened our own entities, and we did it in the
Mm-hmm.
Philippines as part of a kind of extraction from a purchase, so that we would have our own entity. But there's usually a magic number that you make that decision. Do you use an EOR, and then do you do an entity? And then there's the combinations of, I'll do an EOR first, and then my exit strategy is when I hit a certain number or threshold, or I prove a thesis about a market, then you open up an entity. So there's never
Mm-hmm.
just one. Typical
Yeah.
HR answer, but it really depends on what the business outcomes are. But it's important. Engaging in EOR is well worth it under the right conditions and expectations. But you should also have an exit strategy if you're going to continue to expand in that market.
Right.
So a lot of different
Right.
factors. Yep.
And I want to back up because I think you mentioned two very, very important things that
Mm-hmm.
I have seen teams miss, or maybe not spend enough time on in the beginning when you're making these decisions. Exit strategy, definitely, but also, what is that tipping point? What is the point at which it makes sense to move to an entity? There are, I want to hear about your experience definitely on that. There are calculations, right? There is some real conversation that has to happen about those two items. Can you tell me more about your experience? Who did you work with? What did you do? How did your company decide, okay, at X hire, that's when, or before X hire, whatever that number is, we're going to start the work of building an entity. I would love to dive into that more because I think it's a complex, actually, I know it's a complex endeavor and takes a lot of time and effort and energy.
Yeah, I think you have to get it. You have to get smaller to be practical about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to ask yourself three questions, right? You should determine, how many people you need in that country over the next 12 to 24 months. How committed are you to be in that region long term versus just a test market, um, and how sensitive or senior are those roles, right? If you're doing just a single senior hire in a new region, EOR is a no-brainer. You don't want to have to
Mhm.
stand up an entity, go through that, do taxes, audits, payroll. You have to set up a lot of infrastructure and back office just to maintain one employee. It doesn't make any sense. um, a plan build out of 20, 30, 40 engineers, technical talent, whatever it's going to be over the next year, you know, could mean that you're going to establish an offshore delivery center and, starting an entity process now in parallel with having the EOR stand up those folks, if you can get them on board quick enough, makes sense because, you're at that kind of threshold point. For me, 20 or so employees in a region is where you really have to think about the costs of, do you build it or do you buy it and have the EOR run it? And that 20 seems to be, depending on country, the magic number to start to make those decisions. Because in many countries, the costs will outrun the setup costs of an entity in year one if you're going to stay EOR 20, 30, 40 employees. So you have to figure out that exit strategy piece. Um, and it's never HR just making these decisions. Like, there's a lot of people in the room, and I encourage having more people in the room at the start of these
Mhm.
discussions than you might normally, because whatever the jurisdiction might be, you should have general counsel there, you should have finance there, the business leaders that are involved, or whoever owns the P&L that typically has the urgency, and have that debate on control versus speed. Standing up a legal entity gives you total ownership of the employment relationship, and there's lots of benefits to that. But you have
Mhm.
your own benefit stack, you have direct payroll, you own all of it. You might have zero expertise in that space, so you have to really weigh, what the effort's going to be for the output, and the numbers and the expectations. So, answering those three questions on the front end is really important to do, and having the right people in the room as you're thinking through your strategy is important. And touching on it a little bit, and we could probably kill an entire hour on, picking the right EOR is smart. There are a lot of EORs
Yeah.
that will run your payroll and your benefits, and it is a nightmare to try to get answers when you need to exit an employee from that EOR, or they
Mhm.
have illnesses that you have to understand what the regulations and rules are. And so almost every EOR can run payroll, can do benefits, can stand up the front end of the relationship, and you think, hey, that was easy. Why don't we do this more often? And then when you're really managing the relationship for the employee, co-managing it, and you have basic people scenarios come up, their
Yeah.
support may not be that great. But even more importantly, other than the support piece for the employees that are in the EOR, a partner that's going to help you on the front end answer those three questions that we talked about, right? And they may have recruitment expertise to help you build that 20, 30, 40 person group right off the bat.
Mhm.
And they're going to partner with you and say, hey, at some point, I'm going to have to kick you out of the nest. It's not going to make sense financially for you to continue to work with us. Happy to set you up. But at this point is where we would recommend the cost justification and the ownership. We'll help set up an entity for you. That end-to-end type relationship with an EOR is, to me, the most valuable. And many
Right.
will do parts of it, but they won't do that
Right.
end-to-end piece, right?
Well, yeah. Right. As you're talking, I did bring up in the last webinar, one of the topics I had, because I had this exact experience with Linx, was there was a serious situation on the ground in a country, and they had someone in that country to help our employee. And that was something I had not experienced with other employer of record companies. And I've worked with 5 of them. So I have
Mm-hmm.
a good bit of experience across the board. You are spot on. They can offer the they can all do the payroll. They can all do the day-to-day benefits administration. They can all do that. But to have somebody who can help you actually find the talent, get them onboarded, bring them on, pay them correctly, make sure they have benefits, make sure that everything's running smoothly. And then in times of real need, be there to help when you can't. On the ground matters. It really, really makes a difference. And you mentioned building trust earlier in this conversation, especially in a new country. You are trying to build your brand, trying to build a reputation, because you walk into a new country, they don't know you, right? They can see your website, they can see that Endpoint Clinical is a real company, you have employees, they can see your LinkedIn page, but in that new country, they don't know you. So having someone who can represent your organization, an EOR that can truly represent, because they're an arm of you, they're an extension of your HR team. You have to be able to work in lockstep, know that you can rely on them when it's needed. And you mentioned something really interesting. I think one of the conversations that surprised me when I spoke with Rosanya. So for those on this call, Rosanya Holt is the founder of Linx. She's very involved in the company. One of the conversations I had with her early on that I'd not had with other EORs is the exit. And she said, you need to lock in now when you're going to step away. Like, hey, I love getting paid. I'm in business of making money. I love that. But you have to have a strategy, because going on and on and on for years and years doesn't make financial sense for your organization to continue to pay an employer of record when you are at 50 employees, 75 employees, and you're growing. And so you have to be thoughtful about that. Also, there's also that exit strategy mentioned is also a process. Depending on the country, it could be a very involved process to move people. Sometimes you have to stage those moves. Sometimes there are maybe bargaining units you have to work with in certain countries. There may be unions. There's all kinds of in country regulations that the EOR will know about and can help walk you through that. But that transition, if you don't get it right, can be very costly and really a struggle. So yeah, I completely agree. I wanted to just share some of my insight. And I think the other thing you mentioned that's really a great nugget for everyone on this call too is, while they walk into the office, they walk into your office, Matt, and say, hey, we have to expand, or you're in your weekly executive meeting or biweekly executive meeting, and you get the word, we're expanding. They come to HR, but it is not just an HR issue, right? On the surface, it might look like that on the surface, but you have computer equipment, right? How are you going to get everybody equipment if you're not in that country? How are you going to set everybody up so that they can get everything they need? How are you going to handle onboarding? Where are the managers located? Do they understand how to manage someone in this new country? What are the cultural differences? There's so much involved, and so many people have to come into that meeting. I think that's a really good thing to mention for those who are just stepping in to this conversation. Bring in more people than you probably think you need. And then they can self-select out if they decide they're not. But it's much better to have everybody in that conversation and come in asking the right questions. So really, that's really good information to share. I want to talk about, we've talked about a lot about the employees and what happens there. Tell me about your experience with kind of the back office, the technical payroll, benefits, administration of it all. How anything that you can share that's important for our audience to know that could help them when they are really looking at those tactical pieces.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts. Try to kind of address it in a pro and con sort of approach, right? So many of the reasons to engage in EOR, right? You won't have entity costs to set up, or all of the statutory tax filings and things that I kind of alluded to earlier. You won't have need for local legal representation or a board structure for that jurisdiction. Um, the compliance risk goes down. Um, Conceivably, the time to hire is going to be a lot faster because you have local labor experts that will help you and know termination rules and hiring rules and how benefits are structured, and they'll already be in place. It's also easier to unwind if for some reason the market experiment doesn't work out. It's a good way to test markets. The things that I would say to watch out for, and these aren't detractors. These are just things you want to know if you're going to go down the pathway, is like notice periods and termination periods bite people in each country because they vary. Um, the EOR is the legal employer, but the underlying labor law of that country still applies. And so
Mhm.
the EOR providers know it incredibly well and can help you manage exits. But when you're exiting people through EOR, it's a partnership. You don't own the horizontal and vertical. And so that it's going to take extra steps and conversations. Um, I've seen situations where the business assumed a notice period was X and it was actually contractually owed to be Y, and it was 3 times what they were planning, and the financial exposure was a lot higher. So you want to understand how all of that works on the front end. And the EORs are great for 100 reasons, but there is now a layer between you and the employee. So if anything sensitive happens, right, when you're talking about performance management, terminations, the people side, the legal disputes, um,
Mm-hmm.
you have to route through the provider to do that. So pick a provider that is a good network fit for you and your company. That you wouldn't mind being stuck in an airport for 24 hours with, kind of answer the question, right? So because you're
Right.
you're employing your best people in this way, so you need to be in lockstep with one another. Hopefully that helps a bit.
Great. I think it does. I think it does. You mentioned something too, financials, right? It all comes down to that, right? When you're looking at these, and those are the conversations that took the longest from my
Yeah.
experience and were the most involved. So for everyone on this call that's trying to learn, know that you need to walk in expecting some really in-depth conversations about the financial impact. Either way, entity or EOR, make sure that whoever you're talking to is really forthcoming, whichever, if you're speaking with an EOR, that they're really forthcoming about what you're going to be paying, what are the fees, what does it cost per employee, per country. Um, Dive into everything. There's no wrong question. And if they push back on you, then that might not be the right one. They need to be really open about it. If you're working with an EOR on the entity side, of course, you have legal, you have all of the time, right? There's a cost. If you're paying contractors in that country, there's a cost to how long it's going to take you to get from A to entity. Make sure you're thinking about that. I think for me, in my experience working with EORs, not all of them were completely open about some of the fees, and down to even conversion rates for
Mhm.
the currency. Make sure you're asking all those questions. I've been surprised in the past about what came up, what was in the contract, and you don't want surprise. My role was to make sure there were no surprises, right? Make sure that we covered everything. But I had some great conversations with our controllers and the financial. We became very, very close through that experience working with our financial analysts because they asked some great questions. And I think it's something that anybody who's going down either path needs to really pay attention to and dive deep in are the financial implications. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, the sticker price of an EOR is really easy to point to, but and you'll have this conversation with finance invariably and the business, but the real cost underneath that is the internal effort, right? So every
Uh,
time you set up a new employment structure, somebody on my HR ops team is reconciling two systems. Payroll is learning a new process. There's a new pay cadence. You're gonna do change management with employees. You have all these work streams around it. The legal entity on the paycheck. You know, so you're working through those elements in an EOR. Conversely, if you were going to set an entity up on your own, you're dealing with local bank accounts. You need a statutory director in a lot of regions. You need legal representation in that country, payroll registration, ongoing corporate filings. Like the cost, and that's why that number of employees, the employee density in the region, and knowing what your magic number is to transition if it's successful is really important, because on the front end, your cost is going to be better working through an EOR rather than setting up an enormous amount of infrastructure for 20 or less employees. That just happens to be the number that goes off in my mind. So, for us, what it brings is optionality and speed, and those are worth what much more than they just sound like, right? We can always say yes to a new hire in a new country in a few weeks instead of quarters, which matters a lot when the business is chasing a specific opportunity you're trying to support a client win. But during an acquisition we went through, having flexible employment structures like this already in place in certain markets weren't
yeah.
it meant we weren't saying, how do we legally employ these people? What's payroll look like over there? How do we solve these problems? And we could spend more time cultivating and building and nurturing the business and the employees when the EOR picked up that structure, already had it in place, and took the entire category of things that I listed off the table so we can spend our energy where it matters. That's the true value. You can always look at the costs, and it's not enormous on either side, below or above that magic number for me, 20, whatever it's going to be. Hopefully that helps a little bit more.
that is some exceptionally valuable advice and insight. I love what you had to say about those underlying costs. And I think as anyone listening to this webinar, you're building out your case and you're trying to find that justification. I think what you said is really, really valuable to add to that list of questions or the commentary that you need to bring into those conversations as an HR representative at your company. I know we're at time. I want to get to any questions that might have come up from the audience. But before I do that, Matt, thank you so much again for doing this and
Thank you.
taking the time. Your insight is really, really valuable here. I know I've said that a couple of times, but it really is. And hearing this and knowing what I've been through and what's really important to HR, to the HR team members who might be listening, I think it's going to make a big impact for them. And do you have any final thoughts for an HR leader who might be walking into this or is in the mix now? They're in the trenches trying to figure this out. Any final pieces of advice or a piece of advice that you might give them?
Yeah, for sure. I would advise that I would share that you don't make the decision sort of in the abstract. Make sure it's tying to the business roadmap, and if you have um, real conviction that you've sustained and meaningful headcount in a country over the next few years, start the entity conversion early. Use the EOR to get your legs under you. Start the entity standing up at the same time, because standing up entities and building out the infrastructure to have your own, employment entity in a region it always takes 2 to 3 times longer than you would expect. So you don't want to be building the runway retroactively, right? So that's important. The single biggest mistake I think people make is treating this decision and going one route is not a permanent binary entity or EOR, and you pick that lane and you stay in it forever. Very rarely. It's more of a portfolio decision. So you have to consistently evaluate your core market, is the EOR performing correctly? Where are we against our roadmap and our density of employees, and keep revisiting that as your footprint changes, because if you neglect to check in on it and kind of manage that field, so to speak, it'll wind up not being cost effective or appropriate, and you can no longer make strategic choices. You could get locked into some things that were unintended.
I
Yeah.
agree. It's not a set it and forget it
Yeah. Yeah.
situation. And ended up, I don't know about your teams, but on mine, we actually ended up assigning that became someone's part of someone's job, because
Smart.
we had so many people in so many different countries. It became obvious we needed a point person, somebody who could answer questions quickly, had the data, because the data is there. But if you're not mining it, if you're not paying attention to it, it's just some dashboard somewhere. It's really not meaningful at all, and you can't make the right business decisions. So yes, we ended up taking someone who was a manager and giving that person that part of their job, their responsibility was to own the EOR entity, and they worked with others in the human resources department, but they really owned it. And it made all the difference when we gave that specific responsibility to someone.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
employee experience needs to be the same, and they are your employees, right? They
Yeah.
shouldn't be treated like contractors or staff aug. They are full-fledged badged employees. It's just you don't have an entity there, so payroll benefits and the local regional nuances have to be handled through a
Yeah.
partner. But treat them as such, right? They get
Yeah.
bonuses, they get praise, they get kudos, they get promotions. Don't put them out on an island. They are an
Yeah.
integral part of the organization.
Let's get to some questions. Nikesh is bravely working behind the scenes to monitor that. If anybody has any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A or in the chat. I know some folks may not see the Q&A, but we're happy to take any questions from myself or Matt or both of us before we
Sure.
wrap up today. Keep an eye on. I think I have access to the Q&A, so we may not, and that's okay too. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn. So Tiffany Thompson, I'm in the US, obviously, in North Carolina. And Matt, you're on LinkedIn as well. I know we're connected. Anywhere else that people should connect with you?
LinkedIn is the best. I'm on there. Try to put something out that might be interesting. Lately, it's a lot of AI related, HR AI
Great.
related thoughts. But please, feel free to connect with me, ask me questions. Be happy to engage for sure.
Thank you so much. We have one question come in. Now I'm going to get this one to you. If we had to pick, so this is a Mahana, thank you very much for your question. If we had to pick, what's the one question we should ask ourselves before we decide? Oh, this is a good, before we decide between EOR and entity. She said before we decide, but I'm guessing she means between EOR and entity. Is there one really important question you should ask, or you should ask your those departments or colleagues you're involved with and you're engaged with?
Yeah, it all stems from how does it tie into your business roadmap, right? So you heard me talk a little bit about how do you plan to be in that country for the next 12 to 24 months? That's kind of the next layer down. I think it's how does engaging in EOR or building entity tie to our roadmap, and then everything flows from there. How long are you going to be there? How many employees you're going to have? What's the profitability of the projects that you have in this region? Is it strategic to your industry and your business, long term? Everything sort of hangs off of what uh, what your business roadmap looks like, and then HR and finance and legal sort of get involved a few more layers down when the business starts to answer those questions. And I look at myself as sort of the coach or the referee in those conversations. I'm not making those business decisions. I'm providing
Mm-hmm.
options and asking the questions during those conversations to see where finance, the business leaders, the P&L owner, the executives are on those points. And then you try to herd those cats to the decision, right?
Right. Right. Great point. You're right. You're exactly right. Getting everybody in the room. That's a wonderful. Oh, sorry, my Labrador just came into the picture. That's a wonderful example, and thanks for sharing. Great question, Mon. I think some really good advice that you've given us on that one. I really appreciate that. Any other questions before we wrap up the webinar today? And again, we'll replay this. Everyone who attended will get the replay. And if you want to share it, it will be on the Linx app. And I think, Nikesh, if there's we can drop the link to the linx.com website. It's going to take us about 24 hours or so to get this full webinar up and on the website. It won't be available immediately, but we will have it very soon, and we'll definitely push that out on the Linx LinkedIn homepage. So we'll make sure that everybody has access to it. I don't see any other questions right now, but yeah, Matt, again, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. I learned some things too, and I think you've given the audience a lot to think about and a lot to help them be prepared. Right.
Yeah,
That
no,
was one of my goals here, right? Help them be a little bit more prepared when they walk into these meetings and the person the CEO walked up to and said, "Hey, I think we should expand in the Philippines. What do you think? Can you do the research? Can you what you need to have some questions ready so that you are that sounding board in the room and you're the one who can facilitate the right conversations and facilitate those meetings appropriately so that your company is successful." So thanks for all of your attention on this, and love talking with you, Matt. I really appreciate it.
likewise. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Nitesh. And folks, if you have questions, I'd love to hear from you. So thank you for your time this afternoon,
Absolutely.
this evening.
Yeah. Sounds good.
All
All
right.
right. We'll wrap it up today. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.